Hey everybody, on today's episode we're talking about mental health. Our guest today is Rhonda Wiersma. Rhonda graduated from the Westminster Theological Seminary with a Master's of Arts in Biblical Counseling, and she holds a degree in Child and Youth Care from Grant MacEwan University in Edmonton. She currently works 4 days a week at Elisha House, counseling individuals and couples, as well as facilitating biblical healing groups. In the episode, we talked about all things related to mental health. We dove into biblical counseling versus Christian counseling. We talked about the different attitudes toward mental health and the stigmas, both inside the church and outside the church. And finally, we also talked about how you can help those in your life struggling with their mental health and how you can help counsel them in your own way as well. So we hope this episode is informative and helpful to all of you out there. Please let us know what you think about it. And without further ado, please enjoy this episode on mental health. All right, well, we're here today, episode 15. We are talking about mental health, and we have today on the podcast, Rhonda Wiersma. So thank you for joining us, Rhonda.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Very excited to have you. Yeah. We're going to talk about mental health. So I think before we really get into it, maybe we'll just discuss, who you are, kind of your background and story, and kind of what you've done in that area. So feel free to take it away there, Rhonda.
Sure, I'll try. Well, first of all, I just feel a little young to be on the podcast anyways, talking about mental health, because that is a big topic. Right?
Oh, for sure,
what we were talking about earlier. And
yep.
So, my name's Rhonda, and I work as a counselor. Mm-hmm. I have my master's degree from Westminster Theological Seminary out in Philadelphia. And I trained under CCEF, which is the Christian Counseling and Educational Foundation, I think it's called out there. It's just known by CCF. And I currently work at Elisha House, being a full-time counselor there and doing all that jazz.
Okay. That's in Welland?
Yes.
Yeah, Welland, Ontario.
Yeah.
Cool.
So Niagara region, for people who don't know.
Yes.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. And so how long have you been at Elisha House?
I think I've been there for 5.5 years already, which is insane how quickly it's gone by. Yeah.
Nice. So. And so what's like a day-to-day kind of like for you at Elisha House? So what are you doing there?
Typically, I'm counseling people. That's my day-to-day. Counseling people, I do 4 to 5 counselees a day, an hour session long each, and then case notes and other administration tasks. And then whatever else I decide to throw on my load for the day.
Okay.
So,
interesting.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, so what kind of inspired you to get into this line of work?
Yeah, it's a question that is always asked, right? Because you always think that a counselor's got some kind of story with stuff that's brought them into counseling, and that's true. I had a regular kind of growing up, I guess, and I grew up actually in Alberta.
Okay, cool.
And then, just experienced my own different struggles with people and mental health. Was bullied at school, probably struggled with depression and anxiety as a result of that. And then in my teen years, had the typical teen stuff and was dealing with some stuff there and did some really unhealthy choices in my life and just ended up being a really prickly kid. So I went to counseling myself and I just kind of realized, okay, I'm probably not the only person struggling with this. So I'd like to, it was a little facetious of me, I think, as a teen, thinking I could do a better job than other people around me growing up. But that's more or less what drove me into counseling, was thinking, man, if there's so much of a gap that I'm experiencing, then I want to kind of fill that gap as much as I can. So
cool. Try to improve the help a little bit.
Get rid of some of the stigma there. But God has a way to humble you too when you jump into something proud like that. So it's been fun.
So how was that journey when you started schooling? Would you start schooling with the intent of doing that right away, counseling and?
When I decided to switch, I was hoping to become a paramedic actually originally first.
Oh, really? Okay.
So I was in the medical field and doing a lot of that stuff. And I still actually really miss that. But now actually kind of thinking about that, I was actually considering doing chaplaincy originally instead, just not as a ordained pastor or anything like that, but chaplaincy as in regards just working in the hospital and trying to fill in that gap, because it fits with the medical field as well, because I still have a huge interest in that. Right. But then, my journey was, once I switched over from paramedics, then I moved into child and youth care, because my transcript from school wasn't actually good enough to get to the social work program. Yeah. And then from that, I moved into the degree of child and youth care in Edmonton. And then I moved out to Philadelphia, hopped on a train in Montana, and 3 days later, it spat me out in Philly.
And so what was the impetus for that? Like, that's a long ways to go.
It is a long ways to go. For one thing, I think I just wanted to get away from people. Yeah. I just wanted anonymity, if that's the word that you're looking for.
Yeah.
And then as well, I was looking at CCEF in regards to, because I had been not really in contact, but I had read a number of Ed Welch's books. I don't know if you're familiar with who Ed Welch is.
No, not particularly, no. Perhaps we should be, but you can enlighten us.
Yeah, for sure. So he's written a number of really good books. When People Are Big and God is Small, Depression, A Stubborn Darkness. And that was actually one of the first books that I had read, is Depression, A Stubborn Darkness. And I was like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about, right?
Makes some sense. Okay.
Yeah, it was making some sense. And it wasn't just about description. It wasn't just about, hey, you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It was like, oh, this is how God speaks into depression. This is how God speaks into anxiety. And so that literally blew my whole world apart. And I'm like, okay, I want to go and train under these guys. So then I Googled CCF, found out that they were connected to Westminster. I thought, well, this is it. I guess I'm going to get my master's in counseling. So
there you go.
Applied, got accepted, and headed out.
Yeah, neat. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was fun.
So you mentioned earlier, like growing up, like you saw like the stigma of mental health, and that was something you wanted to address by becoming a counselor. Mm-hmm. Do you think, in your own little way, perhaps being able to help that, but also just broadly as a culture, and then maybe specifically in the church culture, has that actually improved? Has the stigma gone down? Does it kind of remain the same? Or what are your thoughts on that in generally?
I don't know. I think when it rains outside in the world, it's going to drip inside the church.
Okay.
So there is still an aspect, I think, of, I wouldn't necessarily call it a stigma, but I think I would call it a resistance to weakness. I don't think we like to be weak. And people who are struggling with mental health, like depression, anxiety, struggle with weakness in a different way, and they struggle with neediness in a different way. And as people, human beings, we don't like to be needy. We like to be needed. We don't like to be needy. Mm-hmm. We like to be strong. We don't like to be weak. But that's not the way Christian culture ought to operate. God has shown in 2 Corinthians that he chooses 1 Corinthians, he chose the weak things of the world to shame the wise. He chose the insignificant things of the world to shame the significant. And that's the way that Christian culture ought to look like. But it's not that way, because culture outside of our church tells us that, you gotta move you up the ladder. You gotta get to the best places. You gotta make a name for yourself. You gotta have significance. You gotta have acceptance. And I think we absorb, or we adopt that mentality. Mm-hmm. And so then it's a struggle to know how to be weak, for one thing. For me, still, I don't like to be vulnerable. I don't like to be needy. Sometimes I get caught up in this mentality of, I'm a counselor. I got to get all my stuff together, and people got to look at me, and they got to, she's got a smile on her face, and everything's happy and good in her life, right? So that's been something that God is still working with me, is just teaching me that I can cry in front of people, and it's okay to show emotion. It's okay to be weak. But I think that's a struggle for us Christians.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess that's across the board, though, for people. It seems like a human nature kind of thing, that you don't want to be vulnerable. You always want to be putting up this brave front for everybody, right? But,
yeah.
That's interesting.
Well, and is that like always a bad thing to be? Like, I guess you don't want to be denying your emotions that are really there, but also, I don't think you also want to be giving into your weaknesses all the time, right?
Yes.
Like, maybe this gets into what mental health is, perhaps. But
I wonder if you can even talk about mental health without even talking about emotions. I've been thinking about emotions for quite a few years as a counselor. Obviously, I'm trafficking in emotions. That's what I do as work. And I think as people who are fallen, I think one of the consequences of the fall is that we've become off-balanced people. We're one extreme or the next extreme. So I think in some ways, maybe church culture, where we have come out of, is stuff it. Don't express emotions. Emotions are the caboose on the train. Emotions can't be trusted. We've moved into now a culture of embrace these emotions, express your emotions. You are your emotions. Yeah. But the middle ground is engage those emotions. So engaging means that you take your emotions and you look at them through the lens of scripture. You're using emotions kind of as a check engine light, to kind of use it for guys. Maybe that'll be more helpful there.
Mine was literally on the way here. So.
Yeah. Exactly. So what are your emotions telling you about what you value, about what you fear, about what you're desiring in this moment? Who are you worshiping? Who are you turning to? Who are you trusting? Those emotions will tell you lots of things. And so then you bring those judgment statements, if you will, to God, and you examine them under the light of scripture. And then that's when you start either self-denying, right? Okay, this emotion is telling me that what I'm valuing. Okay, I was driving here. I'll admit a little weakness here. Is I get very impatient with slow people, especially people that go, from 70 to 90.
Oh, join the club. They're terrible.
Oh, it's so frustrating. Yeah. So I was driving here. I was like, okay, I'm getting really impatient. I'm getting really hot out of the collar. And I just want to pass this person. All right, Lord, I'm not valuing patience right now. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I had to literally talk myself down and say, God, this is wrong. I'm sorry. I'm not going to do this. And I'm going to grit my teeth and I'm going to be patient.
Yeah.
The culture around us doesn't like to say, you should do that with your emotions.
Yeah, right.
If that makes any sense how I'm talking about it.
That's interesting. Do you view like a stoicism that, because we kind of like, I guess that's kind of like a mask for your emotions almost, right? Where you're just shielding your emotions behind a face where, so
that's
people can't see that.
Yeah, it's wrong.
That's wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, like stoicism is wrong.
Yeah.
My description of stoicism is wrong?
Or stoicism is wrong. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it's wrong to do that. So if, is that different from, like maybe using your emotions as like a check, or like not really valuing your emotions as the highest gauge of, reality in your life, I guess? Because that's kind of what you're describing, right? Like it's like, use your emotions to test what's going on, not necessarily to
be the facts.
To be the facts in what's going on.
Exactly. Because emotions are variable. Some days you'll be happy and excited over a situation that the very next day you could be really sad about. Mm. And so in that way, I think then it also takes away the stereotype of a negative and a positive emotion. Because we oftentimes view a negative emotion as depression or anxiety or sadness or anger or frustration. Right. And we view the positive emotions as happiness and excitement and joy. But if we have that black and white, again, it's a kind of off-balanced way of looking at emotions, then we would say that to be sad at a funeral is an inappropriate thing. Well, It's not, right? Yeah. It's not about negative and positive. It's about appropriate and inappropriate.
Right. Okay. So there's just emotions. It's based on context.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So stoicism would it's just like masking everything.
Yeah.
But then using that emotion to gauge what reality is and then how you should react to it.
Yeah, like I guess stoicism for me would be more of you stuff your emotions, you deny your emotions, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you say emotions don't exist. I'm not going to feel those things.
Mm-hmm. One way or the other, I guess.
Yeah.
So maybe break that down a bit, because maybe I'm wrong here, but that's probably, in my estimation, the kind of the dominant sort of way we treat emotions in the church circles, at least.
Yeah.
It's very much just like,
I would think so. Yeah.
Yeah, though it's just kind of in the culture. I don't know if that's a Dutch thing, a Dutch Canadian thing. I'm not sure exactly, but that was always the impression, whether good or bad. It was just, hey, just kind of set that stuff to the side and stiff upper lip and all that.
Yeah, does that go along with like working hard?
Which probably has some value, but I think maybe it's gone too far. So maybe break that down and talk biblically about why that might not be right.
Yeah, I want you to hear also what I'm saying, not what I'm not saying there, right? Yeah. Is that there is a time and there is a place to shove those emotions aside. Just kind of, for example, and I'm going to pick on somebody from CCF that uses example publicly, so I'm okay with using it. But basically, he was in seminary, he was in his final week of exams, and his dad had cancer, and he actually died during his exam week.
Oh my goodness.
So he put away, he's like, okay, I need to focus on this exam. I got to do this exam. I'm not going to, wait with this exam because these grief feelings aren't going to go away. So he had to put those emotions aside and say, I'll deal with you guys later. Right now, I'm going to focus on my exam.
Okay.
When I have a really hard day at the office, I'm not going to sit there for my next counseling and be completely absorbed in those emotions that I'm trying to process. I have to put those emotions aside and walk ahead. So, and so I think sometimes that's where we kind of go wrong as well, is where we want to embrace those emotions, say, well, I'm just going to share these emotions, because if I'm not act on these emotions, then I'm not being my genuine, authentic self. But there's a time and there's a place to put those emotions aside, as long as we don't bury them or stuff them, as long as we take them to God. So part of that engaging is taking that ugly mess sometimes to God and saying, blah, I hate this. This sucks. This is hard. That's where the Psalms can really come in as a lament. In those places. So you want to talk to a person who is God, who can actually do something about those emotions. You don't want to just have it like a dryer ball in your head cycling constantly either. And that's why I like the word engage, because you're engaging with God in those places.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess where it gets tough is that, like, it's, I guess in the example you identify, it's like, you can put your emotions aside to get through a certain thing. But if you continually do that, you know, as a way to cope, like, say, just with your everyday life, I guess that's where it kind of, that becomes burying your emotions instead of, you know, setting them aside, you know, appropriately, I guess, for a time.
Yeah.
So I guess there's no real line. Like, I can't really ask you, like, where's the line, but like,
welcome to mental health. There is no line.
Right. Well, I guess everyone's different, I guess. Right. But are there some indicators though that would be like, a healthy balance, or very hard to say?
There probably is. I wasn't really necessarily prepared to talk about this today.
It's just fascinating.
Yeah, it is. If you want to read more about it, there's a great book called Untangling Emotions by Alistair Gross and Winston Smith that I would just encourage you to.
We will throw in the show notes
to read that. So because there probably is definitely a balance, but I think it's for each person, and I think it's probably, why are you even trying to stuff those emotions, and why are you avoiding them when you have the time and the opportunity to actually start working through them?
Oh, I see. Interesting. Yeah. Right.
Okay. So that was interesting. So maybe before we get any farther into this, I know you said at the beginning mental health is like a super broad thing, but maybe if we can't fully define it, because it seems like it might be kind of this nebulous thing which contains a bunch of different, you know, aspects. What are some signs of good mental health, and what are some signs of poor mental health? And maybe that plays into what we just talked about regulating your emotions and somewhat, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's a big question as well. And I was trying to think about how to prepare for that question. And I don't, honestly, I'm drawing a complete blank right now.
So, okay. So if I came to you and I said, I have a friend, I'm seeing a certain amount of behavior in them, and what kind of things are you looking for in that description that you would pull out and be like, yeah, that's a worry spot, or that's a trouble sign, if we're talking about poor mental health?
Can we give a more specific example? Because I think that, I guess for me, maybe an easy example is depression and anxiety. Those are
the big ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
That's what we're really common with.
Yeah.
So let's say that somebody's dropping their grades in school, sitting in their bed all day, sleeping all day, on their phone constantly 24/7. I'd be like, okay, I'm a little bit worried about you, especially if that person was very vivacious before and was doing things and was getting good grades and all of that stuff. I guess you're looking for more or less an opposite change in what they have done before.
So it's more like lifestyle indicators, or indicators apart from their actual mental things. Well, the things that you would be talking about in counseling. It's not like you're going to be able to see that. Right.
Yeah. So you're looking for lifestyle factors. I think that's a good way of putting it. But if you know the person a little bit better, you're also just going to be looking for how their worldview in the way that they're expressing themselves is changing. So if they're saying, "Oh, there's really, I'm not gonna finish grade 12 this year because it's just gonna, whatever, COVID's just throwing all my plans and fail, right?
Yeah.
And I'll just take it easy, and there's no point in trying and all that stuff." You have to get to know the person really well in order to start hearing some of those things.
So do you often have to look to people that they know, or I guess even to themselves? An honest evaluation of like where they were at before.
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess you don't know everyone who walks in the door.
So you're talking to me as a counselor now, if I would be sitting down and saying what's a marker of mental health and what's not a marker of mental health.
Yeah, I'm just thinking if you have a new client, you're not really sure what they used to be like. So how do you navigate that where you say, okay, well,
anybody walking into a counseling center, their mental health is suffering.
Yeah, right.
Right? You're not
Yeah,
coming to the counseling center because, hey, my life is so great. Let me just share with you. I just got engaged and everything's going well.
Tickety-boo.
Everything's tickety-boo. I would love that if people would come in and just be, put down their counseling fee and let me just talk to you.
Job,
Such an easy job.
You wouldn't have to put those emotions aside.
But so when people come to you, is it usually like they're like voluntarily coming to you, or their family's like, you should go get some help? Like,
usually, unless they're a teen, they're
right.
voluntarily coming in.
Yeah. And does that make a difference in how you? Oh, I'm sure it does. Yeah.
It's not like pulling teeth, then. Yeah.
That could be challenging. I would bet.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe if we so we've discussed some of the signs of poor mental health, but if you feel like, all right, like I'm in a decent state of mental health, but it wouldn't hurt to just kind of look at your own, like my own life or whatever. You're like, are there any signs of like poor mental health or some poor habits that might cause poor mental health? Is there a risk in over-analysis there, like looking too closely? Yeah.
I think that there would be. Maybe, again, that depends on the person. There's some people who can take a look at their life and say, check, check, check. Everything looks good. I'm functioning well. Life isn't going too crazy. And then you got people like me who tend to, I always have to think of the, just like staring into a well and you just end up like falling into it. I'm an overthinker, an overanalyzer. And so very quickly my brain can just go, woo, and just spiral down. And then I work myself into poor mental health pretty much, even if things are going well. So generally I've just learned, okay, I'm not going to go dumpster diving. Everything looks good. Surface level. If anything comes up, God will take care of that. So I'll keep going.
Okay, that's interesting to hear because I probably have the same approach in terms of like, I think I'm in fairly good mental health, but every once in a while I'm like, I'll take stock of my life. I'm like, all right, like, how you doing here, man? Like, but like, it's probably good. I wouldn't want to delve too further into it. Who knows what's underneath there?
Yeah. Well, you feel like, I would say the same thing, but it feels like if you were to go to counseling, you'd be like digging stuff up that you're like, I'm good. I'm just going to live in that.
Just don't talk about that.
Yeah.
Is that healthy though? Or is that something that's
in the stoicism?
I don't know.
Is that stoicism though?
Well,
because that's not really like putting on a mask all the time necessarily.
It's shoving it aside, perhaps. But I'm just saying, what my approach on this is like some stuff is just too deep that it's not even worth digging down that deep. You're like, I don't think that's changing ever. So, or you might, ruffle up the soil too much.
Yeah, let me poke at that a little bit there for a minute, because
that's why we're here. This is good.
Yeah, exactly. Do you want some counseling?
Yeah, I guess trying to Dr. Phil, Dr. Wiersma here.
No, I'm not that far yet.
One day, I'm sure.
No, I hope I don't ever turn out to be Dr. Phil.
Not good counseling on that show? No. Entertaining, but not good.
This already feels a lot out of my comfort zone. Let's put it that way.
Okay, yeah.
I think that when we're digging in scripture and we're actually working through the Bible and applying it to life, God will be bringing stuff up that we're unaware of or that we need to work through. And so maybe with all of that as well is how good is your mental health is how much are you applying scripture and how much are you letting scripture change you as well? Because we're called to be growing more and more like Christ every day. Yeah. And so I think part of that is then also really digging the stuff up and saying, okay, I've been noticing a pattern in my life where I've been really impatient behind drivers. What is this revealing about me? And that may be places that you don't want to go, and that's ugly. That's not necessarily an indicator of poor mental health. It's an indicator of poor spiritual health then in some ways, right? Because mental health and spiritual health go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other, I think.
Yeah. Interesting. So that's actually an amazing segue into the whole biblical counseling versus Christian counseling thing. Mm-hmm. Maybe, just break that down if you can. I mean, those are two big, broad things. I'm sure any of our listeners who are far more educated on the subject will start to cringe at this opening part because it's so basic. But
I have not heard anything about these two.
Yeah, so this is a new dichotomy for us.
Even the most basic explanation would be great.
Give us the ABCs.
Yeah, I will give you some of the ABCs. So I wrote down some things here. So let me just kind of go a little bit off my list because I did want to give. I don't want to step on people's toes because Christian counseling does have its place. I'm just more biased. I just think biblical counseling is the way to go. That's all.
give away the plot. Yeah.
I'll just be honest with where I stand right now.
Yeah.
But basically, biblical counseling began with Jay Adams. I don't know if you guys have heard of the guy.
No.
He was really influential back in the 60s and 70s, I believe. Some of the probably older pastors will be familiar with him. He's quite influential with trying to bring back the pastoral work into the church again. Because what was happening in the 60s and the 70s and the 50s is that whenever there was issues in the church, they would just send them out to secular psychologists.
Professionals, yeah.
And Jay Adams was like, no, we can do this work in the church. In fact, we're all called to be counselors. And so Adams started the movement, but then over time, the biblical counseling movement actually ended up splitting into two different tracks. So Adams is now what we call the Nouthetic Counseling, or ACBC, Association of Biblical Counselors.
Okay.
And then along the way, some other guys, including the late David Powelson, started the CCF kind of movement. And they are nuanced different. CCF is the way that I was trained. I can't really speak for the ACBC Jay Adams way, because that's not kind of my, you have to go to the master's seminary in order to get the ACBC or the training online from ACBC, whereas I got my training from CCF.
Okay.
So that's kind of the two streams. That's kind of how it started.
Okay.
So biblical counseling is different from Christian counseling in the way that we're acknowledging the authority of Scripture for all of life, and also the sufficiency of Scripture for all concerns. So we're coming at it with the basics of what does Scripture say. So what does Scripture say about eating disorders? There's nothing in the Bible about eating disorders, right? But if we scratch the surface, what's underlying an eating disorder? Well, there's shame, there's guilt, there's a desire potentially for control, it's a desire for invisibility. There's deep pain and deep hurt a lot of times that drive people into this. And all of a sudden, Scripture opens up. Scripture speaks about all of those issues. Shame and guilt is on every single page of Scripture, if you will. Dealing with pain, well, you look at how Jesus dealt with people who had pain.
Right.
So we're coming at people not with psychological remedies or coping skills, but we're coming at them with the authority of Scripture, saying the Bible is not just simply an inspirational tool for you to feel better about yourself, but it's here to transform your life. And I'm going to give you Jesus, not some subset of coping skills to how to deal with anxiety. We're going to teach you how to deep breathe, but we're also going to talk to you about calling on God in the middle of the anxiety.
Okay.
Yeah, right. So maybe just make a kind of a stark contrast. What is Christian counseling and then what's biblical? So you kind of laid it out, but what's the big difference? Yeah.
Okay. And I'm only going to speak on my experience here because, again, I don't want to overstep into areas that I'm not familiar with. Some of my own experience with Christian counseling is when I was late teens. I won't even label an age because I forget how old I was when I saw a Christian counselor, and it was cognitive behavioral therapy with a Christian twist. So you're thinking false thoughts. Then we just kind of, so let's say one of the thoughts was, I'm worthless. I'm a piece of junk. Mm-hmm. The positive thought that I just had to replace it with was, God doesn't create junk. Psalm 139. So you kind of throw a Christian twist onto it.
Okay.
It was Christless change because it wasn't going to the bottom of my heart of why was I thinking what I was thinking. Does that make sense? So a lot of times Christian counseling will dabble in, and I'm not saying that this is 100% all the time, but a lot of times Christian counseling will simply try to replace behavior instead of
change the root cause.
Instead of changing the root cause. So a way that we explain it in biblical counseling is if you have a poor apple tree and you got your Aunt Martha coming to visit you, and she really loves apple trees, and you're going to go out there and you're going to staple a whole bunch of fake paper apples on this tree, right? It's going to look great when Aunt Martha comes, but then let's say a huge storm comes in when Aunt Martha is visiting, all those apples are just going to get destroyed, right? Because the root of the tree is not fixed. It's not producing its own viable apples.
Right.
We can't get good behavior. Good behavior is like building a straw house if you're not changing the heart.
Right. I see. Interesting. So would even like a secular counselor criticize that method?
Criticize
saying
the method, our method?
well,
of going to the heart?
a Christian counseling method, like saying that that's not just, it's just not going to the root. It's not going deep enough.
Well, secular counseling doesn't even really go to the root.
Oh, so it's similar then.
It's very similar, I would
Oh,
argue.
interesting.
I believe that there are Christian counselors that are good at getting to the heart. I'm not saying that they're not. My supervisor and I were just talking about this, and he had seen a Christian counselor, and he quit Christian counseling after a couple sessions because the guy was like, well, you can't love anybody else until you learn to love yourself. And he's like, you're not really addressing the sin in my heart, are you, right now, buddy?
Right. Yeah, interesting.
Right. So you have to be careful, I think, with that. And I'm not bashing Christian counseling. I'm not saying Christian counseling is bad, but I'm just saying that
Doesn't have the depth.
it doesn't always have the depth that you're looking for. So
Right.
sometimes you're looking and you're looking and you're looking until you find a legitimate Christian counselor who's like, okay, guys, let's pull a card. I always have the, I don't know if you guys are C.S. Lewis fans.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's right there. There you go. Exactly.
Yeah.
So Voyage of the Dawn Treader, right?
Yeah.
Eustace, and he
Yeah.
becomes a dragon. He wants to get changed. He tries to change himself out of his own dragon skins. The dragon skins keeps peeling off. And that was my experience with Christian counseling. I could just keep peeling off more and more layers of my dragon skin. But when I went for counseling over at CCF, when I was in seminary, it was like Aslan, God was digging his claws at me and ripping off the dragon skin. And it was hurting. It was hard. It was brutal. But I feel and I know in myself that I have changed as a result of that counseling, because it wasn't just me trying to get rid of my dragon skin. It was God actually transforming and redeeming and renewing my heart
Okay.
in those places.
So it really is similar then, Christian counseling, to a way a secular counselor would look at it, but then just adding a lens of the Bible or Christianity over top of it.
Yeah.
Just to frame some of the things that you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
Okay.
More or less. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
then as a result of that, as biblical counselors can get accused of being sin hunters.
oh, I see.
Right? Because we're digging through the heart, and the heart is a very mixed place of sin and sin and grace in those places. And I think in some ways I'll take that as a compliment, because we do take very seriously James, right? James 1-4 is like talking about, out of the desires of our heart comes the fruit of us. So we take very seriously the motivations of the heart. But what we do is we want to also be looking for the grace. So it's not like when you would come in for counseling and we're like, all right, I'm just going to pick an example, just whatever, an easy example, pornography, right? We're not going to sit in there and be like, all right, you got to quit pornography. Like, just cut out the sin in your life, and we'll dig into why you're looking at it. We're going to actually also, what's the suffering in your life? There's a context around in here. Are you looking because you're bored? Are you looking because you're lonely? Are you looking because, you were sexually abused and now you don't know how else to handle all of those desires that got brought up in those places? So we do take a very serious route of looking at the I guess there's a couple. Sorry, this is what happens to me. I get like 3 or 4 different thoughts diverging, and they all want to come out of one mouth, and I don't have 3, so
Pick
it's
one,
the
let's
problem.
Take all the time you need.
So then, in that place, we want to be looking for the way that not only God helping them and changing them, and we'll take a look at that counseling and say, look, listen, man, God's already at work in your life. He's bringing you here to counseling. You're not satisfied with this. You know that this is wrong. So this is a grace of God. And we're also going to look at the suffering in those places. So the way that our modality is, we look at people as in this order, in this very specific order of saints, sufferers, and sinners. And we'll never really diverge from that order. Because as Christians, we stand as saints before God, and we stand as sufferers. And yes, we have to take our sins seriously, but we can't address the sin until we've built a relationship with that person. That's a little bit me rambling around here and trying to sort through things.
Break down those 3 categories again. Like, does it start at one of them, or is it kind of like you're all 3 at the same time? How does that work exactly?
All 3 at the same time.
Okay.
And one will be more pronounced maybe than another one in certain seasons of life. But our first and fundamental identity before God is a saint.
Yeah.
We are righteous in Christ.
Yep.
In Christ.
Yeah.
So that's where we're going to start off.
It's a nice comfort at the beginning, at least.
Exactly. And so and I think that's maybe another difference between biblical counseling and any other kind of Christian counseling, is that I never look at my counselees like I'm the professional and I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm one brother or sister, one sister, one sister coming alongside my brother or my sister.
Yeah, right.
I'm not a professional. I'm not a person who's got their life in order. I am one beggar showing another beggar where the bread is.
Yeah.
That's my mentality when I walk into that room. So automatically that level of expertise is just stripped away.
Okay.
I'm just someone coming alongside you.
Yeah.
I might have some more answers. I might be a little bit more along the path. I know where the bread is and I know how to get the bread. So let me take you by the hand and take you there.
Oh,
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow. That's a lot to,
that is
a lot to piece through.
Yeah. If you had to like steel man, I guess, Christian counseling, could you do it? Like what are the pros compared to biblical apart from being a sin chaser, or however you term that again?
Sorry, say that again.
If you mentioned earlier, like biblical counselors will get accused of being, I think you said sin chasers or something.
Sin hunters.
Sin hunters. There we go. Yeah. But if you could steel man, like make the best possible argument for Christian counseling, what's their case, do you think?
With Christian counseling?
Yeah.
Well, you are usually someone who's registered by the province, so then insurance pays for your counseling. That's a pretty good benefit right there.
Oh, there you go.
Biblical counseling, we fly under the radar of pastoral counseling, so we don't cover insurances at all. But I think with Christian counseling, it's a whole lot more accessible. I think it was just a little bit of a joke, the insurance thing up there.
Yeah.
You can't read my face, I know.
YouTube will figure it out. Yeah.
But no, I think Christian counseling overall is just more accessible. Elisha House is really the only center that we know of, or at least the biggest center. There's a number of individual work in biblical counseling happening around the country, but we're one of the biggest centers in Canada that offers a hub for biblical counseling.
Oh, interesting. So it's not as common.
No.
Oh, interesting.
No.
I was kind of viewing them as like two camps of equal strength, like kind of jockeying here.
Yeah,
But I guess I do hear the term Christian counseling a lot more. Like,
and I think it's because Christians go into places like psychology, and then they go to like Trinity, or they go to Trinity out in Vancouver, or you get your social work, and then you tack on your master's level in counseling. So it's a little bit more easier to get into, if you will, Christian counseling, because you can I'm a Christian, I'm going to go into psychology, and then I'm going to start counseling people.
Right.
So there's
a natural path.
It's a natural path. And that was the path that I was going to go through until Westminster got shoved over into my life. And I was like, Westminster, let's go there.
Wow, this is helpful. Yeah, neat. So I guess maybe you mentioned earlier, Christian counselors, it was you had that experience, or I think you said your supervisor was going to this guy and said, well, you got to love yourself first, then we can start working through your other problems. And I feel like that's a really common lie that society tells us all the time.
Yeah.
Probably particularly for women, I would say, especially. But even it goes both genders too. But so how do you, as a biblical counselor, how do you combat that when people come in and they're like, oh, you got to start with loving yourself, if that's their mindset?
Yeah, and I think here that every good lie has to have an element of truth to it.
That's the tricky part about it.
That's the tricky part about it. So I think in regards to that, I have this. Let me just find this here for a quick second, because I was thinking about this.
Yeah, it's one of those really prevalent kind of messages. It's everywhere.
Yeah. So, I think we would all agree that we're selfishly orientated. Right? So it feeds our selfishness here. And so then we tend to look at interactions with how they'll benefit us with that regard, right? If I have to learn to love myself before I can start to love other people, then we start to look at people as, how are you going to benefit me? And if you're not going to benefit me, I'm not going to really have much use for you in my life. So if people crave to satisfy capital S self in their heart, God is not on the rightful throne in our hearts. God is demanding that we worship him and him alone.
Or put ourselves.
Right. Yeah. And so we, as like John Calvin likes to say, is that our hearts are idol factories. So that throne room in our hearts where God rightfully needs to sit on, God is constantly booted off that throne by self, by money, by mammon, right? Whatever, right? By other people. I'm deathly afraid of people. Like that's a God in my heart that I have to battle with on a daily basis of what do people think about me and why do I care?
Okay.
Right. And so But so if I would put self on my throne, then come and worship me, right? Benefit me, feed me. And that's part of that lie with if you have to love yourself before you can start to love other people. Does that make sense? Did I unpack that enough?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I
but,
think so.
But like the problem with like the whole love yourself thing is like, it kind of makes some sense just looking at it like from just broadly, because a lot of the reason people go to seek counseling is because they have a lot of self-hate or like, self-pity at least.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a better way of putting it.
But isn't that interesting that it all starts with self?
Yeah. The self is still the center.
Exactly. And I think C.S. Lewis, again, going to make me think here that I really love C.S. Lewis, and I do.
Yeah.
He says that our reality is that we are two. Is it two quotes that I'm trying to mash together right now? But we are creatures that are too. We're not. It's not that we don't. It's not that our desires are too. What's the word I'm looking for? Too
Undo.
Too weak, but too strong in that way. Like we are people who I guess basically in the context of all of this, we love ourselves too much. 1 Corinthians 3, 4, 2 Corinthians 3 or 4 talks about being puffed up, right? That's our natural tendency, is to be puffed up. And Paul's is like, forget self.
Yeah.
Self-forgetfulness.
Yeah.
That's where we're going to find the rightful, if you will, self-esteem, by simply forgetting about ourselves.
Well, it's like you mentioned earlier too, one of the effects of sin and the fall is that we kind of go from pole to pole quickly. So you can, I feel like this is probably the case, at least the people who have like a lot of issues with self-hate also have strong moments of arrogance too, probably.
Self-hatred actually is on the same element as pride. It's just on the flip side of pride, right? Because pride is either you arrogant and you're looking down at other people, or pride is also where everybody else stands on top of you and you're looking up at everybody else. Yeah, it's really the two elements of pride there.
Right. Interesting. Huh. That makes sense.
So is that something that the world, that you see the world pushing more recently? Or is that something that's kind of always been there? That, like, I guess it's something that's inside us, but, in the way our culture is changing, with people wanting to identify, you have to identify me, by these characteristics, or, like this, and also with the rise of social media. Is that something that's being like, maybe like accelerating a deterioration in mental health?
Or do you think that it's simply there's more means now to accelerate it?
Right. But so culture has more means to make that a prevalent thing in people's minds. Yeah. Is that accelerating even the rate at which people are coming to counseling?
I think it's definitely accelerating mental health to a degree. Absolutely. We live in such an individualistic culture in that way. It's all about me, myself, and I. Yeah. And I think part of the problem or the breakdown of community is accelerated mental health as well. Like it's no longer that about my community around me that's not only helping me and encouraging me, but now it's what can I get out of my community? If I can just be kind of very brutally blunt and honest there for a minute with that.
Interesting.
I like to look out for myself too, right? If no one else is going to look out for me, then who is going to look out for me?
It's a natural instinct.
It's me, right? Exactly. Yeah. Sure, and that's been part of culture. It's been part of evolution, right? Yeah. That whole thing there is if you don't look out for yourself, then you're going to get eaten by the next big animal, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and you only work together with the tribe if it benefits yourself.
Right. Exactly. Otherwise, you cut loose, and I think that's why a lot of times you see breakdowns in friendships and this sort of stuff, because there's a lack of commitment to work on things because it's not benefiting you.
Friendships, family, marriages.
Yeah, we see that.
Everything.
Yeah, we see that in the church too, I guess. Like the innate like desire for satisfying what you're looking for. I guess you see that everywhere. Like like you said, marriages, but then you also see it in the church, like what you prefer to see in a church service or or something like that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I guess it's
Yeah, cutting loose of churches as well, right, is a big one as well. Like, I'm just going to withdraw from church because it's not satisfying what I'm looking for.
right.
Well, and we were even talking,
individualism.
we were talking about with on our last episode with Mike Hutton too.
Mhm.
We got to talk about different churches and this concept of church boundaries.
Mhm.
Like it used to be, you go to you move to an area, you're going to go to this church, but people don't really do that anymore.
Mhm.
People just go wherever they want,
Mhm.
which is very much a symptom of this individualistic age.
Yeah, and that's I think a part of the problem as well, kind of going back to these emotions, right, of overindulging or underindulging our emotional status in that place. And we've again, there was a connection and I lost it, but that's okay. I'll find it eventually as I keep rambling.
Mm-hmm.
Of overemphasizing what is all it's what's going to benefit my emotions, basically, right? And so the problem with an idol, though, is that the more you feed it, the more it's going to demand. It promises life. It seems so right and good. So go to a church where, you're getting things out of the sermon and you're getting things out of the worship.
You're feeling
right?
good.
You're feeling good. That seems like a good response. But the problem is with that is you're feeding an idol that's never going to be satisfied. I think. What is it? Proverbs talks about the leech. Give.
Cries, yeah.
But never
Right.
satisfied. Yeah.
It never satisfies.
Yeah.
It's
That's interesting.
because your feelings always change.
Mhm.
So there's never an end goal there.
Yeah.
Someone once said to me, this was before I was married, when you're looking for somebody to date, you should, what did they say? Look with your mind and then follow with your heart. And I was like, I thought that was interesting. I mean, I don't know if that's like always beneficial as a saying, but like I've kind of thought about that, throughout my life up to this point. And like, if it's rational, or if it makes sense, if like, if the person is Bible believing, if you are, you get along really well and you're, I guess this is just marriage or relationships. But if you fit really well together, then, your emotions can always change. Like, not that you're gonna fall in love after you're like, this person's a good friend of mine.
She checks all the boxes, but like you're saying, she has the fundamentals.
Don't chase that feeling, because even though don't chase the feeling if deep down like in your mind that it's like, well, this isn't like really, we don't really fit together or something like that.
Fundamentally, like values wise.
So I kind of think I kind of frame, a lot of like emotional discussions around that kind of idea, right? It was the same thing with like church. So if you are going to church and you thinking, well, like that song really made me feel good. Well, it's like, well, don't follow.
That's not the only variable.
Don't look to your heart all the time. Look to your mind too. Like, so I don't know. I guess that kind of,
that makes some sense. Like you got to make sure the church has good theological underpinnings. It has to be, faithful Bible believing church. And then it seems like as a bonus, if you feel great going to it and you feel like you're being inspired and you're receiving the preaching of the word. Yeah.
Well, now we're looping back to the discussion at the beginning of what emotions and,
but you can't have a conversation with mental health without talking about emotions.
Yeah.
Right?
I did want to circle back though on the question of self-love and how you still combat that, because we got partway through. I don't think we quite finished it there. So if someone's coming into your practice and they feel like, the answer is to buy self-hate is to have more self-love. How would you go about getting them on the road to having love for self, but not in that prideful sort of way?
Yeah, I think, and I can kind of speak into this as well, because with any depression, there's going to be some self-hatred aspect to that. And that's definitely an area that I've struggled in. And one of the areas that I have, what I would encourage counselors and what has worked for me in the past is a couple different things, actually. One of them is serve other people. Just serve them. Just love them well and serve them well. Because you're not focusing on yourself. You're not trying to fix the self-hatred in those places. You are putting your focus back out where it belongs, right? Love the Lord your God with your whole heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. So that's definitely one thing there. Other thing is definitely tuck in your back pocket and memorize and know not only who is God in relationship to you, because I think sometimes we look at ourselves in relationship to who we are in God, right? We are fearfully and wonderfully made. We are accepted. We are adopted. We're predestined. We're sanctified. But also, who is God in relationship to us? Well, God is gentle and lowly. He's meek. He comes to us with compassion. He comes to us in steadfast love. He comes to us slow to anger and abounding in that love. And so you need to have both of those things as well to be able to examine some of that self-hatred and remind yourself of those things. And then the third one is don't engage those thoughts. When you're starting to struggle with self-hatred, it's like little natter and, radio in the background.
Just ignore it.
And you just learn to ignore it, because that sometimes is unhelpful thoughts, right? Like when you're dealing with an addiction or you're dealing with whatever, like, okay, I'm going to tell you to not think of a pink elephant. Well, now you're thinking of a pink elephant, right? Mm-hmm. You just learn to right. Yeah, I know, right? You're welcome.
It's fantastic how that works. Yeah.
And you just learn to, okay, I'm not going to think about that, right? Or if you're learning to not swear and all of a sudden you get these obsessive thoughts in your head that are full of swear words, it's like, hi, just going to ignore you.
So that's a healthy ignorance, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, it's a healthy way of saying, God doesn't want me to engage this thought. I know that this thought is not helpful.
No good will come of it.
And no good's going to come out of that. So see you later. I'm not going to engage with you there. And that requires a lot of self-denial, because, you want to engage it, right? It's calling out for you to engage it.
So does that go back to CBT, like cognitive behavioral therapy?
Definitely. But I would claim that.
But how are you addressing the root?
Yeah,
in that?
exactly.
So that's
but here's the thing, is that all truth is God's truth. So CBT is God's truth, right? Philippians 4 says, think about whatever is pure, whatever is noble, whatever is right. That's cognitive behavioral therapy right there.
Yeah.
I always like to think that people outside in the world, in my apologetics class at Westminster, I kind of mashed two big words together that I just love to say every once in a while. People outside the church are presuppositional kleptomaniacs.
All right.
Presuppositional kleptomaniacs. So basically, presuppositionals is your presuppositions is your worldview.
Yep.
Foundations. Kleptomaniacs is chronic thief.
Just grab world.
They're stealing constantly from
that.
Christian worldview. We have to reclaim it and redeem it.
And show where their current assortment of worldviews is lacking. Yeah,
exactly.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So we can do that with whatever, right? With any psychology is a wonderful way of looking at the world, but the problem is that you have a CBT person stroking the elephant's trunk and describing what the elephant's trunk is, and then you have a dialectical behavioral therapist describing what the leg is, and then you have a psychologist that's more biological in basis, like neurology, and he's describing the tail. You got these three very different elements of an elephant. Christian can stand back and take a look and say, guys, you guys are describing an elephant, but this is very useful information about the trunk, about the tail, and about the leg.
We have the whole spine or something.
But we have the whole, we could take 30 feet back and take a look at the whole thing and see how it all works together.
Gotcha.
So we still use psychology. I love reading psychology. It's wonderful. It's great descriptions, because you're learning so much about the natural world around you.
Yeah.
But claiming it, redeeming it, and renewing it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because there's a lot of people are immediately critical of anyone who's a secular expert in psychology or something like that. Like, we're way too into Jordan Peterson or something like that. But I mean, he says a lot of good things that Christians would agree with. But I think it takes someone to stand back from him. Yeah, which is a great analogy. Like, look at the whole elephant, and he's just looking at one piece.
Yeah.
I mean, he might be jumping all over the elephant, but at one time he's talking about this, and then he's talking about that.
Yeah.
And
this is more of stoicism, though, I think. That would probably, I don't know if you're familiar with these ideas at all. Or?
I know I should be listening to him, but I got enough stuff on my brain that I can't cook another thing in my brain. So.
We'll have to have you on for round 2, because I'd be very fascinated to see what you think of him, because he's helped, it's worked for millions of people. So there's something there that is
right.
Useful.
But I think it goes back to this. I won't be able to say it. Presuppositional. What is it?
Kleptomaniacs.
Because he kind of does steal ideas from the Bible. Well, he acknowledges the Bible is very helpful.
He sources it,
and though he's an evolutionist, which doesn't obviously make sense, he would steal ideas like, you're made in the image of God, and that means and he would define that more or less correctly, I guess. And then he would extrapolate that to be, and this is how you deal with this in your life. But yeah, I mean, he obviously isn't, I don't think he's standing back far enough.
I would say like the gist of what he says is, in order to live a meaningful life, part of it is, actually serving others in terms of like, okay, you need to like take baby steps in order to, up your capacity and complete your tasks. And then B talks about this a lot, like basically carrying your cross and struggling up the hill toward the city of God. Now, what is the city of God? He doesn't fully define that. It's a little nebulous, and that's an entire who knows. But
just have to read Augustine's City of God book. There you go.
Yeah, it's not the short one, so that would take a while.
Take a few episodes.
So, it's on the reading list for who knows when I'm 50 maybe, but should get to it one of these days. But like kind of the meaning is in doing the tasks that you find meaningful. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that's helpful for people. I'm not sure if it's long term helpful. Certainly not eternally. But that's kind of where he's coming from. But maybe we should just back up before, because we just kind of went with CBT and we're like, everyone knows what that is. But maybe you can just explain that quickly for the folks at home. What is CBT?
Sure. CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. So that is with the presumption that your thoughts influence how you're going to emote, and then your thoughts and your emotions combined is going to determine on how you behave. And so if we start with the cognitions of changing how you think, then your emotions will typically follow your thoughts, not all the time. And even if they don't, then just start behaving differently. And all of that stuff will start to change. And I think that there's some usefulness in there too, is that emotions can't be forced, right? You can be thinking all the right things, you can be doing all the right things, and your emotions are still like, I don't want to do these dishes. This really sucks. But you're doing them anyways, right?
Yeah.
So
it's kind of the idea, I guess, is kind of a snowball effect, is that like, you kind of put it into work and put it into motion, and hopefully it improves things. And it seems to be, from what I've seen at least, to be very successful for people.
Yeah, it is, because it is probably one of the deepest secular counseling methods out there, because it's actually moving beyond of simply change how you feel, or poor you, your genes are such and such a way, and you're determined by your context and your environment, and you're a victim, and so just kind of continue with the victimhood. It's actually moving into, you are active, you're not just simply a passive being in the world. You're active, so you can change, you can choose. And I really appreciate that about cognitive behavioral therapy.
Interesting. So it's changing the mind by changing your behavior instead of the other way around, I guess.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Cool. And changing your thoughts, which will change your behavior. It's kind of like a mishmash of all three of them together.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's cool. Like laying out. Yeah, you think, then you emote. There's your emotions, so then you behave based on all that.
Yeah, and it kind of just cycles like that. Jonathan Haidt, I don't know if you're familiar with his work at all. Okay, he's a psychologist. I don't know the specific discipline he's quite in. Social psychologist. He wrote this book with Greg Lukianoff, who's he's just a lawyer, but he has a whole history of just using. Just a lawyer, but in this discussion, but he used CBT. He had tried to take his own life, then he used CBT and was recovered successfully. But they wrote this whole book on Generation Z and the whole rise of the safe space culture and fragility and wanting to do away with anything, the whole mantra, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. The opposite of that is what's being taught to that generation, which my generation, I guess. So they wrote that whole book on that, and one of the things they recommended to help fight that attitude is CBT, because you voluntarily take on challenges.
Yeah, and it's proven as one of the most successful psychology or therapies out there.
Yeah.
Cool. Interesting.
I mean, this discussion is flying by. We only got half an hour left, so I want to make sure we get some other good stuff in. I'm super fascinated. Maybe just go back to Elisha House for a sec. Who are the types of people you typically help in your work? Is Elisha House it's more pregnancy centered in terms of women, or do you do women and men, younger people, older people? How does that work?
So we have kind of two arms, if you will, to the ministry. We have the unplanned pregnancy or side of it. So that's usually where we'll be not it's been changing. We don't usually always we do get a lot of church women coming through that through that side as well. So we're working mostly with unchurched or unbelievers coming in through the pregnancy side. And then the counseling side, we're usually seeing more of the churched folks coming through.
Okay.
And that is men, women, some kids, some teens, marriages, families.
So all across the board,
broadly. Yeah. But what's really unique about it is that we offer free counseling to the women who are coming in through the unplanned pregnancy side.
Oh, it's awesome.
So I'm usually the main counselor for that. So I actually have tons of interactions, which is so much fun with a lot of unbelieving people, women. And it's been a real joy to work with them. It's not like they know that we're a biblical counseling center, so they know that we're Christian. And so it gives us kind of a platform as well to operate out of. And I always tell the young ladies that I'm working with, like, listen, I'm never going to shove Christianity down your throat, but I'm also not going to be afraid to say, you know, that Jesus can help a lot with that, that sort of thing. And they're open to it. And I'm just working with a young lady right now and was able just to have some really good conversations about the differences between karma and grace. And it's just been fun, right? You get challenged in your own mind and you have to think, how would you talk to somebody who, you know, it's not an abstract thing of why me. It's been fun. It's been definitely
that's cool.
Sharpening of my own faith in some ways in regards to that.
That's cool. And how do these women, they just get recommended the center, or how do they come to Elisha House?
Yeah, we do a lot of advertising.
Okay.
So usually on Facebook and Instagram and stuff like that was where we'll get it. And then word of mouth, we've been in operation for 30 years. So people are very familiar with who we are in the community. Yeah. And then we get some really unplanned or unintentional advertising through some of the pro-abortion I would imagine people out in our area as well. So they'll put us on their website. We'll get some women walking in through, like, heard that you guys do unplanned pregnancy support. Can you help me? So it's kind of neat that way.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that's some real pro-life work right there.
Yeah,
I'm sure you saved lots of babies that way. Just fantastic. Maybe we did talk a little bit about this earlier, but like, I guess this is a good kind of segue into it because you have the two arms of Elisha House. What are some of like the key differences you see in mindsets in terms of unchurched people coming in for counseling and people within church circles?
His answer might shock you a little bit, but in some ways, not a lot.
I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah, and I think let me unpack that a little bit. And I'm putting that out there kind of bluntly, just maybe to get your attention there. But it's
a good clip.
Yeah, it's a good clip. Just stop it there, right? I think in many ways, God has become a very abstract person in their lives, void of their struggles. How on earth is God going to speak into my struggle in this? And I think that's the joy of the work that I do as a counselor, is that I do just a lot of pastoral ministry. There's not a session that doesn't go by that we have the Bible open and we're busy looking and helping this person see how God addresses their struggles. And once that person starts grasping that they can go to God and start talking to God and have this relationship with God, is really when change starts to go. But honestly, from an unbeliever to a Christian walking in, the Christian knows that God exists, has that fundamental belief, has that knowledge, but is wrestling just as much as the unbeliever of how does God fit into my story. That's why I say
might walk in with a Bible, but it's not necessarily open.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Or if it's open, it's just confusion and it's frustration. And that's again, a little bit different there as well. But it's just been the real joy of pointing people to Jesus and having them actually really develop a personal relationship with him and going to him. Like, it's just,
you see how that would turn into like almost a Bible study, because you're just you open the Bible and like, oh wow, okay. And I guess once you start seeing that in yourself, then you can be like, oh wow, okay, tell me more.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the perks of why I love my job so much, is because I get to witness that metamorphosis of people growing from God doesn't care about me to crying out to God in the counseling sessions. And it's amazing. It's beautiful to see.
It's fantastic. Yeah. It really goes to your point about you can't have good mental health without good spiritual health as well. Yeah.
Your vertical represents your horizontal and your horizontal represents your vertical. So it goes hand in hand. Your relationship with God is going to be reflective on how you view people, and how you view people is oftentimes how you view God as well.
Oh, clip number 2 right there.
There
There you
you
go. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
That's
something
not
that you
me.
want
That's
too,
not
too.
me. That's from somebody over at
Yeah.
CCF. Don't.
That's a great quote, though.
I'm not going to plagiarize myself there.
Yeah. How about we talk about differences between church and unchurch, but what about men and women? Do you find? I'm sure there's a difference there.
Yeah, I actually ended up talking to my supervisor about this because he's a guy, and I'm like, so mental health with guys, what do you do? And he's like, oh.
Hey man,
So
how's it going?
yeah, we kind of processed that through a little bit, and reality is that we're all created as image bearers. So that means that across the board, we all have emotions,
Mhm.
and we all. I think the only difference. I guess not the only difference, but one of the major differences is simply the sexual differences between a male and a female. But other than that, males and females have the same calling on God in their life. And so I think in some ways, how males and females deal with mental health is more of the struggle because of the stereotypes that we put on males and females. But we, like, in our culture, males, don't talk about your problems. I mean, you guys could probably speak into this a little bit more. What are some things that you guys hear as guys about mental health?
Yeah, like we were saying, like when the idea of this episode came up,
Mm-hmm.
I put out the call on Instagram, so we got some feedback on that, which hopefully we get time to get to some of those questions at the end. But one of those, actually, we can just flip to her. Yeah, here we go. It says, we got this from one of our followers on Instagram. How to deal with a culture that encourages men to be more feminine, that would be like the secular worldly culture, and express their feelings as a way of getting rid of their, quote, toxic masculinity. Now that's a whole other kettle of fish, but that's kind of one extreme.
Yeah.
While, and this is from the listener, while also being part of a church culture that tells you to, quote, man up and not seek help on mental health issues. Now, I'm not sure if that's entirely fair because I think there is a bit of a change happening there. But I would say
we did speak to that stoicism of like,
but
I think
yeah,
that might be more prevalent
like
in men too.
An example I brought up when we were talking about this before the show is like if you worked in construction and like you had to, if you were like, I should go see a counselor, and you're like, all right, I got a 3 o'clock appointment with the counselor. Like, hey guys, I'm taking off to go see the counselor. Like, what? Like, what kind of fairy are you? Like, no one does that. Like, if you had a doctor's appointment, maybe, but like a counselor, it's just so I think. That's probably how I would react too. So I don't think it's a good reaction, but it probably represents the current status for.
But I think it is changing it. I think that there is something to that
a little bit, but that's probably broadly true still, I would say.
Yeah, maybe.
And yet there's women that I know of who struggle with just as much as a guy does to show weaknesses.
Right? Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's probably just a distribution. Like it's just.
Well, I think but women generally are more like touchy-feely, like share their emotions with each other.
Generally. But
okay,
I think that's the problem about those categories of effeminate and femininity is because what is that? It's basically just cultural mandates of how females should act and how females shouldn't act. You go
based on patterns that we see at large.
But then we go back to scripture and we see David, he's killing a lion on one hand and strumming the harp in another hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you can be in touch with the feminine side.
You can be touched in your so-called feminine side, but I don't even think I would strip away that concept that that's your feminine side is to be emotive. Mm. God created us with emotions. Mm-hmm. He created you guys with emotions. When you're in touch with your emotions, you are more human than the guy who's not in touch with his emotions. Right.
Yeah, that's something like, I think if guys went through a series of counseling, it would be like, I mean,
you guys would all be Davids.
It could totally change the way that you look at it.
But I think we process issues differently too. Like
you do, yeah.
Like there's the classic thing where like women will just kind of get like will kind of build up resentment and then like not like that maybe there's a catfight breaks out eventually, but guys are just like either like it just comes to a clash and you like fight it out typically and then you're done.
Yeah. And women typically like to talk and talk and talk and talk and then talk some more.
And it kind of just
and it circulates. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
and then guys are just like, can you just get to the point? Is it about the nail or is it not about the nail kind of thing? I don't know if you guys have seen that clip on YouTube.
No.
It's not about the nail. Oh, you do need to take a look at it. I'll show it to you guys after. It's great. It's the classic example of the differences of communication between a man and a woman.
Yeah.
It's not about the nail. So basically it's a woman sitting on the couch. For you listeners, just pause it now and go listen to the video.
Okay.
It's on YouTube. It's not about the nail, but it's about this woman sitting on the couch and she has a nail protruding from her head and she's complaining about what this nail all does. And the guy's like looking at her and being like, if you just pulled it out, you wouldn't have your sweater snagging on it. You wouldn't have such a headache. And she's like, it's not about the nail. Just listen to me.
So she just wants to be heard, I guess?
She just wants to be heard.
Okay, yeah.
So in that way, there is definitely that difference there. But again, it's...
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of what I'm getting
great.
at. It's like, as a counselor, like, how would you... there might be the same fundamental issues, but how a man would best solve the problem or how a woman would best solve the problem is going to be different, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, men like to solve problems too. That's
that's
definitely
another thing,
like men are always looking for, well, in general, are looking for a problem that they can just solve. It's like, well, okay, well, let's just talk about it, and then let's just get past it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, I don't know that women get past like or need to get past it.
They take a different approach.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because men will just be like, okay, let's deal with it, then it's gone, and like kind of like bury it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think that's more readily our.
Is that a fair assessment?
I think so. I think you see that on little guys playing on the playground, right? And they just have a brawl over something. They fight it out and someone gets a black eye and then they're friends again, right? Yeah. Girls, they, ignore each other for 6 years and then they finally become best friends.
Yeah.
I don't get that. I'm a type of person who's like, talk to me, figure it out, let's fix it, let's deal with it. And I feel like there's an emotional word that I'm trying to get away from more.
Yeah.
But I think that in some ways you're more human when you can communicate and you can just talk about these things because God did give us language. And so whether it's a quick fix, and for a guy, it's going to have to learn to slow it down sometimes and say, okay, it's not just, fixing the room or getting a laundry machine set up and you're in the thing there. Sometimes there's going to be more to unpack. And then a guy's temptation is going to be just like, well, it's done and over with. It's in the past. We don't need to talk about this anymore. I think this comes out quite a bit in counseling when it comes to sexual sin. So if a guy has committed adultery, he kind of expresses this to his wife. It's off his chest. Let's move on. Whereas he needs to learn to see that it's like an octopus. You got the body of it, and then there's 8 different legs of it all in different places of your life that you have to deal with. And so, in one hand, you just get over it. But on the other hand, you don't just get over it.
Right.
Right? You have to kind of also see that it's not just a simple move on. Right? I don't know.
So guys would be more clean.
I don't know if I'm pushing my femininity on you guys now.
No, but that kind of makes sense as well.
But my thought is like, if a man, like apart from the relationship end of it, like if a guy is struggling with something and deals with, say what you call the octopus body, is that enough for a man usually? Or is it still something that like seeps back in because all the tentacles and all over the world? Because those things are still in his life too, not just in her life. What do you
think? You think if you just deal with the octopus head and then those tentacles are still alive and kicking?
Well, I feel like the guys can bury some of those things somehow.
They'll die out because they're not connected to anything anymore.
No, that's true because you guys do have boxes, which I don't get.
Yeah, we compartmentalize.
I don't get that. I don't know how you guys do that. Just waffle brains. I don't like it.
Waffle brains.
Waffle brains.
Eggo head over here. Yeah.
Belgian waffles.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't counsel guys for this reason because I just find it, sorry, males. I find it just a little frustrating because I have a way of explaining things to females. I'm like, you get it. And then for a male, they're like, huh? So
interesting. Yeah. Okay, so
hopefully we've done our best today.
Yeah, I hope so.
We're trying to understand.
Yeah.
I think we're on the same page.
Yeah.
So I'm curious though, because we said, we talked that men and women are both image bearers, which it's true. But men are also called to have a role of leadership, and women are called to have. You have to be very careful when you phrase this part of it. It's a supporting role, I guess, but a helper. Yeah.
Yeah. Eitzer, I think it's in Hebrew.
So I mean that's always a tough thing to talk about, especially in our culture. But does that frame a little bit of how men and women deal with different things mentally? Like, I think that, I mean, it's harder for me to. Well, let me say this way, I guess. Like, as a leader, I think you wouldn't want to show as much vulnerability in general. So, your king isn't going to be like sobbing all the time. And we see that with Justin Trudeau. Like he's a like more emotional person than you would anticipate to be the leader of a country. Yeah. Right. And so you put onto him, I guess, more of a feminine trait or something like that. is it something to the biblical way that leadership is phrased that creates this in church or in men's minds that, you need to be the stoic
emotion?
I'm just going to take a step back here. I think we're kind of looking at an elephant really closely out here,
yeah,
right? I'm just going to take a step back. Jesus strikes a perfect balance between masculinity and femininity that we need to look at, right? So yes and no, right? In regards to your question.
Situation?
Jesus was a leader and yet he wept, right? And yet Jesus was also perfectly submissive to his Father in all of those places. And so I think that in these situations of figuring out, masculinity, femininity, leadership, helper, look to Jesus as the perfect striker of that balance that we need to find.
It seems like, it's based on situation because, at one point he's flipping the tables of the money changers.
Yeah.
But he's also weeping over the death of Lazarus, who he raises from the dead.
Yeah.
So,
and he's very much of a leader in those places as well, and yet shows significant vulnerability.
I was going to say, to your point about that, I think there's a certain amount of strength, maybe not too much vulnerability, but like a wise amount, perhaps, like that Christ showed, is actually a big strength. Like in your Trudeau example, I think that actually serves him quite well.
I think actually
he's very vulnerable.
Not to bring Jordan Peterson's name back into it, but that guy, the way I think it's not a show at all. I think that's exactly who he is.
It's very
he shows a lot of emotion a lot of time. And I think it's like, it helps you relate so much easier to him.
Well, it does, because you don't, and sometimes this is a streak that I think as a counselor that I have, is that you can show emotion in the counseling room. And when you can self-disclose a little bit, like, I kind of get that. This has been my experience with that. You build rapport and you build trust way sooner than if you're just, and it kind of maybe goes back to that weakness, neediness thing. If you don't show weakness and neediness, are you truly human? No, you're not. So you're not going to be necessarily trusted. Right? You show a little bit of emotion, you show a little bit of vulnerability, and all of a sudden people are like, I can relate to you. And I trust you because you're expressing this and you've been through it, right? So,
yeah, and we love those stories, right? Like we love to hear people talk about the story, and I guess that's why, like, Jesus is the perfect example, because Jesus went through the things that we go through. So the other example that strikes me is when a minister would choke up on the pulpit, and just knowing, I think it totally, like, it can't be fake, obviously, because you'll just know that right away. But if it's real, it like brings the gravity of what he says like right to you right away. Yeah.
Well, you had Pastor Bezoyan a couple of weeks ago, right? Or a couple months ago, or however long that was. Look at the incredible impact that God has had in his life as a result of becoming public with his struggle with alcoholism. And if he would have kept that on the down low and just been super private about it, he probably would have been doing his own healing and his own growth. But look how much it's exploded his ministry because of him being publicly vulnerable.
Yeah. That's a really good point, actually. Yeah. There's a lot of, I think that's a big part of why he resonates with so many people. Yeah. Because they see a guy who's in a position of power with a lot to lose. And there's strength in being that open and that vulnerable.
Interesting.
And not that
actually, that reminds me of a question that I asked him, because so I think I asked him something like, at some point with an addiction, you have to hit a wall. Like, so him in his story, everyone will remember it because that was a great listen to episode. He hit a wall, basically. Like he came to a point where, his life couldn't, or his situation couldn't sustain the addiction. And so it all came to the fore, and then he was forced to deal with it. How does that happen with mental health? Because I think a lot of times we're forced to deal with things that we don't necessarily want to deal with. And sometimes that's people in our lives, and sometimes that's just a situation that we just run into. And I guess you said you don't want to talk about anxiety, depression too much, but that, I guess, is like one of the ways that this manifests, like, very obviously. Yeah. And so that people can see and recognize that. Are there other ways, or is there things that you can look for in yourself that you can recognize? Maybe this is the time to get to know.
I think when you reach a place of your life is spiraling and you can't deal with it anymore on your own, I would actually encourage people, before you hit a wall, you have an issue and you have a problem, don't try to do it alone. At all, because we weren't designed to do life on our own. Each one is called to talk about in Galatians 6 there. Each one is called to carry his own load, but we're called to carry each other's burdens. We're not meant to do this individually. And so if you're struggling with a question and it's been running around in your brain like rabbits and breeding like rabbits, anxieties tend to do that, where you tend to have one rabbit and all of a sudden you have 2 and then you have 3 and then you have 9 and then you have 20 and then you have 35 anxieties and you're like, can't deal with this anymore.
Yeah.
Reach out for help, right? And it doesn't need to be a trained counselor. It can be a friend. It can be anybody in your life. We're all counselors, whether we have good counsel or bad counselor. Counsel is basically advice and encouragement. And so I just say, when you reach a wall of, not even reaching a wall, but when you start realizing that you're dealing with things that you don't know what to do with, there's big questions, you don't know how God relates to these things, reach out. There's no shame in it. And I'm speaking to myself as well in these places, because I don't like to reach out for help. I like to deal with it myself. Again, I like to have my life
in control and
looking all good on the outside.
Yeah.
Even if my life is falling to shambles.
But that vulnerability helps you help people. So
it's a catch-22 there, right? Yeah. But that's where humility then comes in too, right? And I think for me, I know it's definitely a pride thing, as I don't want people, and it's also a vulnerability thing. I don't like to be vulnerable. And it's a pride thing of me wanting people to look up at me and say,
look how good she is.
Yeah, exactly.
She's doing such great work.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's so interesting, because I think if you talk to a minister after he was had an emotional moment or something like that on a pulpit, I don't know that they a lot of times would enjoy having had that, but it's so impactful. So it's you try to balance those things, right? I think someone like Peterson has recognized it in himself and actually he doesn't lean into it, but he's fine with it. He'll just he could be crying in the middle of a lecture, and then you're just wow, this is really deep. And then sometimes you're I wonder if he really wants to be crying, or if he But yeah, to your point, it's impactful. So yeah.
It's easier to do in a counseling room than what it is in public ministry. And that's where I think being a pastor is so much of a harder public ministry, because it is a public ministry. My ministry is private ministry. I'm working with individuals. So if there's a woman describing stuff to me and she's not at all emotional about it, I'll start getting choked up for her behalf to show her that she should be expressing some emotion. Or if a counselor has had a breakthrough and she's having a really just an honest, for the first time, prayer with God, I'm sitting there with tears streaming down my face. It's beautiful. It's good. It's easy for me to do that in the small room. It's harder for me to do that in the public setting. So I think that's,
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that ties nicely. I just want to circle back on that church culture question we had earlier. Is there, in your position as a counselor, are there things that the church can do, and maybe specifically pastors or elders, pastors especially in the preaching of the word, to address the mental health challenges of Christians and kind of where we're at as a society, and maybe even specifically young people, because it's obviously, as we all know, it's rising rates of anxiety, depression, suicide, all that stuff.
Yeah, and that kind of also ties in with that parental question of how can parents talk to kids about mental health issues. And I think, honestly, breaking the ice and mentioning those things, just kind of addressing pastors there, good preaching will bring up problems out of the woodwork, right? And so if the pastor is scared to bring up specific issues, then people aren't going to be talking about it usually with him either. And that same goes with parents. If you're unwilling or unable or getting embarrassed to talk about sex and pornography and drugs, your kids are going to pick up on those things. I think having those honest conversations, knowing when to have those conversations, checking up on each other, I think as well. Sorry, my mind's kind of going off in a rabbit stream here, but it kind of, I think we as Christians sometimes think that we can't judge each other, which is true to a degree. We can't judge each other in self-righteousness, but we are called to judge each other's works. And we're called to call into account as in a way of, sister so-and-so, I notice that you've been sleeping with your boyfriend. That's not right. God's not calling us to do that. That's judging another person, but you're coming at that person with love and trying to come alongside them. And so I think that's where maybe we have also gone wrong in a way that we don't feel like we can have those direct and honest conversations anymore with people. But I would say we have to know each other well enough to be able to speak into some of those things, and then to not be afraid, because it's a vulnerability and it's a risk on our behalf to open up our hearts to say to somebody saying, hey, I think that you're struggling in this area, or are you struggling in this area? Because that could lead to shut up and get out of my life, mind your own business kind of thing, right? Like that's like, oh, okay, confrontation right there. Don't like that. But I think if we move more and more and start having a culture more and more of having some of those honest conversations, and then calling each other out and saying, dude, you are like overindulging your emotions right now. Deal with it. Like, get out of that
situation.
Yeah, that pig pit there. Stop wallowing in your own stuff and go help me clean out the shop, kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
like
do something useful.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting.
So, do you think mental health, like obviously when elders come to do home visits and whatnot, they're here to talk. They're there to talk about your spiritual health. And I'm sure physical, I guess, too. They'll ask how you're doing and all that stuff. But is that something worth highlighting? Or do you think the mental health side of things just comes out if you're talking about this spiritual health?
Yeah, I think you have to have a discerning ear to listen to some of that. So I would just, I think there would be, I'm always suspicious when people act like life is going hunky-dory. I'm like, yeah, what are you trying to hide? But that's maybe just because of my own counseling experience behind things. So I think for an elder, if they're kind of getting the feeling that they're just being too Pollyanna about their life, just have a discerning ear. But then I think in those places to recognize that it's hard for people to be vulnerable. And I think one of the big things that I would just challenge pastors and elders and good friends to do is don't be afraid of checking up and checking in. I think that was one of the things that I really struggled with in some of my church communities, especially in the past, is people never checked up on you after sharing something. It was like weeks before they'd be like, hey, how's it going? And you'd be like, did you forget? Don't be afraid of checking in, and make the time to check in.
Right.
Because if you don't check in,
that's the other tough side of being vulnerable too, is that like one, you're sharing, some personal stuff, and then two, you're kind of committing to a deeper relationship and more accountability.
Yeah, that as well. But then when you open yourself up, and then all of a sudden all you hear is crickets for the next 9 weeks.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like accountability, you got to keep talking with that person.
I ain't going to talk to you again if I don't hear crickets from you 9 weeks after burying my heart. Sorry, you're out of my life. Like that's where my pride comes in and my own selfishness, right? But I think there's legitimacy in that. Is like, do you really care about me then? So yeah, you are committing to something when you do start to open, like be willing to be that person for people to dump on. Absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
It's something I see in myself that's hard to, maybe make that commitment. But I see other people who are those, I view them as like those people who are like, those are the people that you go talk to, because those are very easy people to talk to. But they must be like burdened with like 100 people's lives, because they're so willing to talk to everybody all the time. So like, those are the people that I would go to. Those are the people that everyone goes to. So I try to like identify myself a little bit, like what you were saying, that like if we all try to be more how we could be a little bit more like that.
Yeah. And pray about it. God doesn't expect you to be everybody for everybody, right? You are one person that's finite, that's limited. And so who are the people in your life that you might need to reach out intentionally to? Yeah. Right. And that's the thing. If you don't have to pursue every single 399 people in your church community and say, talk to me, because they'll just be like, you're weird. But talk to the people in your circles and in your life. If they're not in your circles in your life and God has put them on your path, let's say you're walking around a church and you're seeing a teen run to the car and go hide in the car till her parents come to the car. Pursue that person, right? There's an issue there. There's a concern there.
Interesting, yeah. I think we don't have tons of time. This just reminds me of one thing. In a business, so I took business in school, and part of networking, the advice they gave us, ask people what their pain points are in their business. Because people love talking about their businesses, and it's not as personal as talking about themselves. So it's like, don't ask them about themselves, because they don't want to talk about themselves, because they have problems, but they don't want to talk about them. Ask them about their business, and then they will let you know what the problem is with their business. And then that is a really, really good connection for you. It actually brings you really close together. So the point was be intentional about asking about the pain.
Mm.
And I don't know if that I'm intentional about that with people. That's like, I may see it, but then I don't ask about it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I'm like just being respectful. Like I respect, maybe we're not that kind of friend. Like, yeah, I can't be everything to everyone. So maybe I'm not that person to you. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to like overstep and be like, tell me your problems. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But then, yeah, I guess like if you take that view, then you just never do it. And then
Mm-hmm.
you're just never that person to anyone.
Right.
So yeah, that's where my mind went when you're saying that. That's
A really good
It's
way
something
of
to look
doing
at.
that, instead of asking, hey, what are you suffering with? Tell me. Right?
Yeah.
Because people would be like, you're a little weird. I don't want to tell you. How can I pray for you? How people respond to that question is going to reveal a lot about their heart and about what they're willing to share. Because it's not about saying, tell me everything about your life and about your heart, but just simply, how can I pray for you?
Interesting.
And when the person opens up, however it is, then take that time to pray for them at that moment. It's been a little awkward for some people at my church, because they've like kind of had conversations with them because they know that I'm a counselor, and all of a sudden after a conversation, I'm like, how can I pray for you? They tell me, and I'm like, can I pray for you right now? And they're like, here? I'm like, yeah, here.
You can do it anywhere.
Yeah,
Fun
exactly.
fact.
That's funny. I don't even know if I asked that about myself enough. Like, yeah, I don't know. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a good way of doing it.
that's really good,
I think it's a
yeah.
good action item,
Wow.
honestly, to end it off.
Yeah.
just for people.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we cover a lot of ground. I mean, we could probably keep talking if we wanted to, but we should keep this around 90 minutes or so. So
Yeah.
it's been fantastic having you here. Thanks,
Yeah.
Rhonda.
You're welcome.
Thank
I'm
you
glad
so
I could
much.
be here. I hope I didn't ramble too much. So
No, for
I
sure.
think you made a lot of sense. So
Yeah.
I hope people find this to be useful
Mhm.
and helpful. And then, yeah, if you need help, don't be afraid to get help. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
for
definitely.
sure.
So you know where to find Rhonda and
Yeah, we
Elisha.
can link Elisha House
Yeah.
down,
Elisha House,
down
yeah.
below and all that stuff. So
and yeah.
Cool.
So, yeah. Hopefully
This has
people
been-
have questions. Let us know. We'll always be in touch with Rhonda too, so maybe we can get her to answer some
Yeah, for
further
the feedback
questions
episode
if
of-
necessary.
Sure.
But-
This wasn't too scarring, so it's all good.
good stuff. All right, folks.
Good
This is we had some real talk today. So
Yeah.
keep having some real talk yourselves. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Real Talk. You can send us your feedback by emailing us at reformedrealtalk@gmail.com. You can find us on social media by looking for the handle Reformed Real Talk. You can find us online by going to realtalkpodcast.ca. We look forward to your feedback, as that's what helps us grow and improve as podcasters. Real Talk is produced by myself, Lucas Holfluer, Tyler Vanderwood, and Tim Van Woudenberg. The theme music was created by Calvin Hutton. The table and cabinet behind me were made by Ethan Vanderwood of Eureka Woods. And finally, this sign in the studio was made by Zebra Signs. That's it for now, folks. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.